Dr. Sasha. It's a pleasure, of course, to be on the stage with two TLN gold medal recipients, Jackson Diehl, who was just awarded the gold medal for his public service and outstanding commitment to the highest standards of journalism, and the Al Jazeera Media Network, represented here by Abderrahim Foukara, who is the Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief of the Arabic Language Network. Great to share the stage with you, and congrats to you both.
Thank you.
Jackson, you've had a very interesting, long career with the Washington Post, over 40 years. You must be exhausted. How does it feel to have yet another recognition added to your portfolio?
It feels very nice, and I'd like to thank TLN for the award, which I really appreciate. And I'd just like to take a couple of moments also to thank my longtime boss and the editorial opinion editor of the Washington Post, Fred Hyatt, who died yesterday, and who was in charge of opinion at the Washington Post for 22 years. And I think you made a very eloquent presentation about one of the great problems we face in the media today, which is the flood of fake news, the flood of irresponsible social media. But you know, there's another problem we face, which is the siloization of reporting. People all going to their own corners, only listening to their own sources of news, which only present one side. And I think the great contribution of Fred Hyatt as the editorial editor of the Washington Post was to create a space where you could find opinions from all sides. The Washington Post editorial page is one of the few places in the country where you can find socialists, you can find Trump supporters, and you can find basically everyone in between opining on the issues of the day, whether it's the withdrawal from Afghanistan or the Supreme Court's argument on abortion. And we may be the only place where you can still do that. And that was Fred Hyatt's contribution. I think that's something we need to think about. How can we still create these spaces where it's possible to hear multiple points of view and not only one?
And you and I were speaking on the phone earlier today. My condolences, of course. I know how much working with him over the years meant for you, but you were also talking about the space he gave to all these different perspectives from right across the world as well. At the Washington Post, in your 4 decades, you've done pretty much everything there is to do. You've written columns, opinions, editorials. You helped manage the Post's editorial opinions department, but also you oversaw the paper's national staff in the lead up and during the campaign, the presidential campaign in 2020. You also oversaw the foreign staff at the Post, a multi-million-dollar budget, opening bureaus from Kiev to Rio, overseeing the international coverage, essentially. When you look back at the ebbs and flows of international coverage over the years, since the late 70s, when you began as a younger journalist, based in so many different places, how have things evolved? What has it been like for you to cover some of the major events of every decade for the last 40 years for such a major publication as the Washington Post?
Well, again, it's an interesting counterpart to what you were talking about, where today we have so many different sources and this flood of social media. You know, when I began as a foreign correspondent, and when David Ignatius, who is here tonight from the Washington Post, and John Danishevsky from the Associated Press were foreign correspondents in the 70s and early 80s, foreign correspondence was kind of a business of reporting by elites for elites. There were very few, relatively speaking, media outlets from the United States abroad, the 3 networks and a handful of newspapers and the wire services. And our distribution was not that wide. If you wanted to read the Washington Post foreign correspondence when I was a foreign correspondent, you had to live in this area. You could not get the Washington Post outside of Washington. Even in the early 80s, the New York Times was only available in the New York area. Now, we are available all over the world instantaneously, as are all of these social media outlets and the fake news outlets. And so it's just a completely different atmosphere. And there's actually positives and negatives to it. I think one thing I appreciate is that you don't only have to depend on a handful of correspondents now to find out what's going on in the world.
And almost counterintuitively, you said to me that the staff has grown quite exponentially since you were at the Post as a correspondent. The subscriptions have tripled during the pandemic. The paper's doing pretty well.
Yeah, we've taken off as a digital organization. When I started as a correspondent, we were only available here in Washington, but we reached 60% of the households in Washington. Now, far fewer households in the Washington area subscribe to the Washington Post, but we have 3 million subscribers overall, the vast majority of whom are outside of Washington, and more than half are outside the United States. And so it's a completely different news organization we've become.
And speaking about news organizations that cater to people, well, here in the United States, but right across the Arab world and the region, Al Jazeera network, Abderrahim, hard to imagine that it was launched 25 years ago, 1996. I know you joined in 2006, took up your post as bureau chief of the Arabic language channel. In fact, you and I crossed paths at the old K Street office when I was joining the newly launched Al Jazeera English network in 2006. How has Al Jazeera managed to navigate in what has been a treachery terrain, a lot of tough obstacle courses, political pressures, and the proliferation of media outlets in the region? How has it managed to do that and still remain at the top?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ghida. And a big shout out to TLN and to Sasha in particular for having made this possible for me, and for the two awards, their awards to Al Jazeera and to the viewers of Al Jazeera worldwide. Now, 25 years, sometimes I have a hard time believing that we've been around for 25 years. We've taken a lot of beatings as a network, first as Arabic and then as English and then AJ Plus and the other members of the Al Jazeera family. But Al Jazeera is still around, and it has learned to make all these challenges work to its benefits. As you know, Al Jazeera's bureaus have been closed in a great number of Arab capitals, in the Middle East and North Africa. It's had problems with the Iranians, it's had problems with the Israelis, it's had problems with the Americans. It's here. But I would say that for me as an Arab journalist working for Al Jazeera, it's probably a real privilege for me to be working for Al Jazeera here in the United States, where decisions are made every day that affect people in the region down to their daily bread. And you asked me how come it has survived for 25 years. There's obviously a whole litany of different reasons why it has survived. One of them is that it has been able to go where audiences want it to go, so to speak. Meaning, in the specific case of the United States, sometimes there are days in normal times when the Al Jazeera bureau bureaus in the United States provides up to 25% of coverage on a given day. And that's because there's an insatiable appetite in the Middle East and North Africa for things American, for American news. We have an operation here in DC. Just the facility in DC alone has some 240 people. Mm-hmm. Is that enough? No, because there's so much to cover in this country, and you can never have enough people to cover it. And we rely, on many occasions, we rely on what the investigative work that the Washington Post does or the New York Times does and so on, despite some of the risks that come with that. And just to bring this full circle, just wanted to say something about the Washington Post. The Washington Post, as you know, Jackson, has its own tale for people in the Arab world. For many different reasons. One of them is the Watergate scandal. And it has a tale not just because Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein were able to uncover the scandal that led to the bringing down of the tricky Dicky administration, but also because these two people, they did what they did, and yet they didn't get taken to jail, they didn't get shot at, they weren't executed, they didn't disappear at 4 o'clock in the morning. And that's very important for what we are all doing here, although the challenges that we all face as journalists these days, including now in the United States, are pretty massive.
But how, just very briefly, how have the challenges changed when it comes to Al Jazeera? Because I remember the stigma was very real. In fact, we waited for 8 years for the entire 2 terms of President Obama. We were promised that, yes, we were on the list and we would get the interview eventually, but it never subsided. I just wonder, what kind of access are you able to get these days, and have you gone past this? Because just last year, AJ Plus was listed as part of the Foreign Agents Act, FARA. How much has that complicated your job?
We face real challenges in the United States, it has to be said, and we have faced real challenges. You mentioned the stigma post 9/11. Al Jazeera, at that time Arabic only existed, became synonymous in the eyes of many Americans with Osama bin Laden, the tapes of Osama bin Laden, and so on. We've navigated all this treacherous terrain over the lifespan of Al Jazeera in the United States. And there have been ups and downs in terms of access, depending on what administration you're talking about. There were real challenges with the first Bush administration. I mean, real challenges, because they didn't like the coverage of Al Jazeera of the invasion of Afghanistan and of Iraq. Al Jazeera put a lot of emphasis on civilian casualties of the war, and the Bush administration was not happy about that. Second Bush administration, things relaxed a little bit. Things changed. With Obama, there was a sea change in the sense that Obama wanted to start a new page in relations with the Muslim world, and he saw Al Jazeera as one of the important vectors to allow him to do that.
But didn't grant the network an interview.
He didn't, but Biden at that time, who was his vice president, did grant us an interview. I actually did it with him in Bethlehem. But the overall story or the overall lesson for me that I wanted to quickly convey here, when I go to the Arab world, a lot of people, because Al Jazeera has done a lot of hard-hitting, feisty journalism, and it continues to do so. And it continues to be caught up in the politics of the region, whether you're talking about the Gulf or the Middle East or North Africa. We all know that tale. But when I go to the Arab world, people say, what's it like for you to operate in the United States? And I say, despite Jim Crow, despite what happened in the election of 2000, despite what happens on the 6th of January, the United States still has laws, and Al Jazeera, when need be, can go to court and challenge some of those difficult situations that we have in the United States. But not one administration has ever asked or imposed restrictions on Al Jazeera's ability to travel around the United States and show Arabs in the Middle East and around the world what life can really be in the United States. The good, the bad, and the ugly, like what happened on the 6th of January.
The good, the bad, the ugly. Jackson, you've written extensively about all of those things, and you've been known to cover quite critically authoritarian leaders from Latin America to the Middle East, from Sisi to others. What is for you the work that stands out the most in what you've done? And what was it like for you to cover Trump at a time when, let's face it, a lot of people in this country today, respected journalists and pundits, are openly using the F word, fascism, to describe America's slide away from democratic norms?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, it was a tremendous challenge to cover Trump, and how to describe his actions in a way that wasn't just counter propaganda, that gave him credit when he did do something that we thought was right from the point of view of the opinion page. As another thing for which I would give Fred Hiatt credit is that in spite of the fact that he wrote an editorial, before Trump was even nominated by the Republican Party in 2016, saying he was unfit to be president and would be a disaster if he were to take office. Once he was in office, when he did things that we thought were correct and proper, we said so. And we also continued to publish people who defended him and supported him, and so that we also still had that point of view in the paper. And again, I just want to emphasize how important it is, even at a time of Trump, even when you have a president who you think is unfit and illegitimate, you have to try and have a space for debate by both sides.
And he railed against you, not you personally, but
Mhm.
against the newspaper on Twitter
Yes.
whenever he could. His campaign sued the Post as well for defamation, for publishing opinion pieces
Right.
that sort of highlighted the alleged Russian connection. Was this campaign to intimidate, though, the Post? Anything different from the campaigns that have preceded Trump, from other presidents in the White House?
It was different. Yeah, Trump tried to force the sale of CNN. He tried to. He is accused of having prevented the Pentagon from awarding a contract to Amazon, major contract to Amazon, because of Jeff Bezos' ownership of the Washington Post. These kinds of attempts to truly bully and manipulate the press with economic means really hadn't been seen since the Nixon administration, when the Nixon administration tried to take away the TV licenses of the Washington Post when we were covering Watergate. So this was quite a different level of pressure on the media.
But on the other side of the spectrum, you also have had people like Senator Bernie Sanders say that the Washington Post coverage of him was slanted and biased. Did he have a point?
I don't think so.
No?
No.
It was fair game. You were being sort of critical of everyone across the board, would you say?
Well, it depends on whether
the
you're
financial
talking
leanings had nothing to do with any editorial position the paper might have taken towards this or that candidate.
No.
Can you expand on why you'd say that unequivocally there was nothing there that
Because
sort of justified his
we're professional
his
journalists. We did this on the basis of the longstanding positions of the Washington Post and had nothing to do with any economic interests of the paper.
For you in your coverage of the region, the Middle East, which has stood out, obviously, in your being awarded this prize today, what stands out for you? What was the most important piece of journalism, if you can point to one that you were able to achieve?
Well, I think that two things. One is advocating for political prisoners and journalists who were silenced in many parts of the region, Turkey, for example. And others would be trying to influence U.S. policy towards Egypt and Syria, towards pressing Egypt towards the democratic change that eventually happened there, if only briefly, and trying to press the U.S. administration toward taking more forceful action to stop the massacres by the Syrian government.
Just in the couple of brief moments that I have.
We're robbing people of their dessert, you know.
I know. My apologies. But so let's sort of do this in 2 quick minutes, if I can give you both a final say. What's in store, Abderrahim, not just for you, but for the network? I mean, it's done so much over the years. Is there something else up its sleeve when it comes to expanding the Al Jazeera Media Network? What's next?
I mean, the expansion and retraction is an ongoing process with Al Jazeera. It has been like that since its inception. There are moments when it feels that, you know, expansion is warranted, and, you know, we started Al Jazeera America, as you call, a few years ago, as an economic model that it didn't work out, so we stopped it and we started using the resources elsewhere. We know that digital platforms are very important. They're the way forward. Incidentally, if I may say quickly, Al Jazeera was probably one of the precursors of marrying social media to conventional television. That happened in Egypt during the days of Mubarak. And Al Jazeera will probably continue to go down that path, the path of the marriage between social media and conventional television. But digital coverage is very important for us. US coverage is very important for us for the obvious reason that this is and will remain a very important country for our audiences in the Middle East and around the world.
What's next for you, Jackson? I know you say you're now gainfully unemployed, happy to be taking a break. Is there a book in the offing for you? And how do you see the role of traditional journalists in this sort of changing environment with social media shifting the equation so dramatically?
Well, I plan to stay off social media is my plan, and to work on longer term projects and longer form writing.
do you feel that journalists have to make a concerted effort to try to regain public trust? Or is that something that will sort of naturally find its way?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they do, and the only way to do that is to do a good job reporting and to do a fair job reporting, and you know, that's what the Post is trying to do, and I think that's probably why our subscriptions have tripled in the last few years.
And that is why this event is being held as well, and why you are being recognized for the work that you do. Abderrahim Foukara, Al Jazeera Media Network, of course, and Jackson Diehl, formerly of the Washington Post. Thank you both very much indeed. Thank you all. Forgive us for holding you up from your dessert. Thank you, Dr. Sasha, Dr. Hamilton, and everyone else. Thank you very much.